The night Thebes learned to breathe again. The first scream did not come from the battlefield. It came from a narrow Theban street when a man realized the Spartan patrol had stopped outside his door, not to search, not to arrest, but to wait, to remind him that his home was a room inside someone else's house. Subscribe to the channel, like and share in the comments what you know about these legendary warriors, and now let's get back to the story. In those years, Thebes was a city with a hand around its throat. Sparta's shadow wasn't dramatic, it was administrative. A garrison in your square, a harsh smile at your festivals, a suggestion disguised as advice. It was the feeling of being watched even when you were alone. It was the way men learned to lower their voices on the word freedom, as if freedom were a crime that could be overheard. Oppression doesn't just steal territory, it steals posture. It makes you fold your shoulders inward. It teaches you to conserve hope the way you conserve food, carefully, quietly, with shame. And yet, Thebes had a problem Sparta could not solve with spears. Thebes had anger. Not the hot anger of a riot, but the cold, deliberate anger of people who have been humiliated long enough to study the humiliation like a craft. Thebes watched Spartan discipline, Spartan cohesion, Spartan certainty, and realized the truth that every dominated city eventually learns. You cannot out-muscle the machine. You have to outthink it, or outfeel it. Theban leaders, men who understood both politics and the body, began asking a question so simple it sounded stupid. What makes a man hold the line when his legs want to run? Sparta's answer was obvious: training, punishment, tradition, shame before the city. Thebes chose a darker answer. Thebes decided to build an army that didn't fear shame before the city, because the city is abstract. Thebes decided to build an army that feared shame before one person. And if you want to understand why that worked, you have to understand the most reliable truth of the human nervous system. We can lie to ourselves, we can negotiate with fear, but we cannot easily survive the gaze of someone we love when we disappoint them. That is where the sacred band begins, not with a trumpet, with a stare. Love as a weapon, not a poetry. Centuries later, philosophers would praise the idea. An army of lovers, they said, would be invincible. It sounds beautiful when it's written in clean ink. It was not beautiful when it was implemented. The Sacred Band of Thebes, 300 heavy infantry, hand-picked, drilled, and bound into pairs, was a unit engineered around attachment, not vague brotherhood, not civic duty, not slogans. Attachment in its most personal form, the kind that makes you feel exposed, the kind that rewires your priorities, the kind that makes your heart do irrational math. Sparta's genius was to make fear manageable through repetition. A Spartan boy learned early: pain is normal, hunger is normal, obedience is normal. Their courage was forged in austerity. Theban genius was to make fear impossible to manage alone. If you fight for honor, you can rationalize retreat. You can tell yourself, I lived to fight another day. But if you fight beside the one person who has seen you weak, the one person whose touch can calm your breath, the one person who knows your private faults, then retreat is not just tactical. Retreat is abandonment, and abandonment is a kind of death that lingers. The Sacred Band did not eliminate fear, it rerouted it. Instead of fearing the enemy, you feared a specific moment, the moment you turned away and your beloved saw your back. That was the trap, and it was brilliant. how you choose men who will not leave. The Sacred Band did not recruit like a normal army. There were no public announcements, no open calls, no promises. It was a private selection, and it started the way predatory systems always start, by watching. They watched young men in gymnasia where bodies shone with oil and competition. They watched wrestlers lose and then stand up without excuses. They watched runners push through cramps without theatrics. They watched who stepped between an argument and a knife, who took the blame for a friend, who volunteered for unpleasant duty when nobody was looking. But physical talent was only the door. The real question was psychological. Officers looked for emotional stamina, not just physical toughness, impulse control under insult or panic, capacity for devotion without becoming unstable, tolerance for intimacy and accountability, a kind of pride that wanted to be worthy, not merely admired. Then came the tests. Some were obvious: formation drills under exhaustion, sparring with little rest, long marches in armor. Others were designed to expose the nervous system. They were humiliated publicly for minor failures to see whether they responded with rage, collapse, or adaptation. They were deprived of sleep and then assigned complex tasks to see who maintained focus and who became cruel. They were isolated and then suddenly reunited with someone they cared about to observe whether relief became weakness or strength. In modern psychology, you might call it stress inoculation and attachment evaluation. In Thebes, it was called finding men who could be bound. Because the Sacred Band wasn't built from individuals, it was built from pairs.
The most dangerous marriage. Some pairs were already lovers. Some were close companions whose bond had turned quiet and permanent. But in many cases, the pairing was strategic. Veteran officers observed social dynamics. They noticed who gravitated toward whom, who calmed whom, who provoked whom in productive ways. They paired men who created balance, the furious with the steady, the cautious with the daring. Then they forced proximity. Pairs were housed together, ate together, trained together. If one committed a violation, both were punished. If one excelled, both were rewarded. This did two things. First, it created mutual surveillance. No man could hide his weakness when someone slept beside him. Second, it accelerated bonding through shared hardship. Humans attach faster when they endure stress together. The Sacred Band weaponized that. Not every pair survived the process. Some bonds curdled into resentment. Those pairs were removed, because resentment is poison in a phalanx. It makes men hesitate at the exact second hesitation kills everyone. A successful pair became something terrifying. They became a two-body organism. They learned each other's breathing, each other's tells, each other's panic signs. They could sense when the other was about to break, not by words, there's no time for words in a shield wall, but by the micro shifts of weight and pressure. This is the intimacy of violence, knowing a person so well you can predict how they will move when death is near. Life in the barracks, where love becomes routine. The Sacred Band lived apart from the normal citizen rhythm. They were not weekend soldiers. They did not disappear back into farms and shops after drills. Their existence was continuous. Morning began before sunlight, with cold water and silence. Not because silence was noble, but because silence is control. It reduces nervous chatter. It forces attention inward. It makes a man aware of his body and his partner's body. They ate together, often the same simple foods, nothing indulgent. Discipline begins in appetite. Men who could not govern their hunger were unlikely to govern fear. After meals was conditioning, carrying shields for hours, sprinting in armor until lungs burned, wrestling to build not just strength, but comfort with contact. The phalanx is intimacy under pressure. If a man flinches from touch, he will flinch from the press of shields. Afternoons were for weapons, spear thrusts against targets, shield strikes, sword work for the moment when spears shattered and the world turned close and ugly. Evenings were for formation, and nights for the strange rituals that kept them welded. Pairs would sit together in the dark, not speaking, just breathing in rhythm. It sounds meditative. It was more primitive, a training of nervous systems to synchronize. When you breathe with someone, your body learns them as part of your safety. Sometimes they swore oaths over their weapons. Sometimes they shared small cuts on the palm, pressing blood to blood, an act that said, "We are not separate things." Religion was present, but not always comforting. They honored Ares, yes, but also Heracles and Iolaus, heroes whose bond was legendary. They visited shrines, they offered sacrifices, but the real sacredness wasn't in the gods. It was in the promise, "I will not leave you." A promise that becomes horrifying when the only way to keep it is to die. Holding the line while watching him bleed. Most armies train men to fight their enemies. The Sacred Band trained men to fight their own reflexes. There is a reflex in the body when something precious is threatened. Rush forward, break structure, become chaotic. That reflex kills phalanxes. A phalanx survives only when men accept that structure matters more than impulse. So Theban trainers created exercises that were cruel by design. Pairs were put in mock battles where one partner was wounded and forced to crawl, dragging a shield. The other partner had to hold position, keeping the line intact, even as his partner struggled beside him. The message was brutal. If you love him, you will protect the line that protects him. If you break formation for him, you kill him. They also trained controlled panic, sudden horns, smoke, yelling, simulated chaos, not to harden men into numbness, but to teach them that calm is a choice, not a mood. Punishments were collective. If one man failed to keep his shield level, both ran until vomiting. If one spoke out of turn, both went hungry. And then there were the private punishments, the ones that made men understand the unit's logic. If a man betrayed his partner's trust, he was not beaten in public. He was made to stand at distance while his partner trained with others. Separation is the most effective punishment in attachment-based systems. It triggers panic, shame, obsession. Men learned quickly.
Built for impact, not elegance. The Sacred Band were hoplites, heavy infantry, yet their equipment was chosen with an unusually aggressive logic. Their aspis shields were reinforced, heavier, designed for repeated collision. Their spears were crafted to survive initial impact, but also to break in predictable ways, so men could transition smoothly to swords. Swords were short, brutal, practical. The Sacred Band did not romanticize duels. They fought in crushed spaces where a long blade becomes a liability. Their swords were for the moment when breath and blood mix, when you see whites of eyes, when you feel the enemy's warmth through armor. Helmets restricted vision. This wasn't an accident. Limited vision reduces independent decision-making. It forces reliance on the formation. It forces trust. In modern terms, it prevents individual hero syndrome. The Sacred Band had no heroes, only pairs, only the wall. How 300 break thousands. A phalanx battle is often described like a shove.
That's partially true. But what decides battles is not shove strength alone. It's timing, depth, morale collapse, and the moment one side realizes, we can't stop this. The Sacred Band specialized in that moment. They were often positioned at decisive points, commonly the left wing in Theban strategy. Thebes used an oblique approach. Concentrate strength on one side, smash the enemy's best troops, then roll the line. The hammerhead was the Sacred Band. They formed deep ranks, sometimes far deeper than standard. Depth creates momentum, but more importantly, it creates psychological pressure. When you face a deep column, you feel outmatched before contact. And once contact happens, you feel the weight behind it. Their breakthrough technique relied on holding until the enemy committed, sudden acceleration at close distance, shield strikes to destabilize front ranks, targeting officers and elite troops. They didn't chase light troops, they didn't waste force, they aimed for the spine. And when the enemy's spine cracked, the rest collapsed on its own. The things they did when honor wasn't enough. The Greeks loved to speak of honor, but honor doesn't win every battle. The Sacred Band used methods that shocked even allies. They studied enemy morale like hunters study animals. They learned which city-states relied on charismatic leaders, which relied on tradition, which relied on fear. Then they targeted the psychological weak points. They killed standard-bearers first, not because the banner mattered tactically, but because banners hold identity. When a banner falls, a man feels his city fall. They fought with unnerving silence, no battle cries, no chanting, because silence makes men imagine things. Noise feels human, silence feels inhuman. Sometimes, after breaking a section of line, they refused to pursue fleeing men. They held position instead, letting the panic spread, while survivors ran into their own ranks screaming. It is difficult to rally a man who has seen calm killers simply stop and stare. They also used feigned exhaustion. They trained to appear winded while maintaining reserve strength, baiting enemies into reckless pushes. Were these honorable? That depends on who writes the story. The dead don't care. The day the myth of Sparta died. In 371 BCE, at Leuctra, Sparta arrived with the confidence of a god. Spartan hoplites had been the terror of Greece for generations. Their discipline was legendary. Their reputation alone could fracture enemies before the first spear thrust. Thebes arrived with something different, deliberate heresy. They stacked their left wing deep, an overwhelming concentration, and placed their best where tradition expected weakness. The Sacred Band stood there, shields touching, pairs breathing together, eyes hidden behind bronze, waiting. When the Spartan elite advanced, they expected the usual: left wing collapses, right wing rolls the line, victory. Instead, they met a wall that moved forward like a single thought. Contact was brutal. Spears shattered, shields slammed, men screamed under the crush. The Sacred Band did not surge in chaotic rage. They advanced like machinery, fueled by intimacy. Spartan discipline held, for a while.
Then a small thing happened that changes battles. A Spartan in the front rank stumbled. Another tried to step into his place. A shield gap opened. A Theban spear found it. The man fell. In a normal line, his comrades might step over him, hardening their hearts. In the Sacred Band, when one fell, his partner's body tightened, not in panic, but in lethal focus. The Thebans pushed. Deeper ranks drove forward. Spartan elite began to lose their perfect spacing. And once Sparta lost spacing, it lost its godhood. Spartans began to retreat in tiny steps. Then a step became two. Then the line broke. The myth broke. That day, the Greek world shifted. Thebes rose, Sparta bled reputation into dust. And 300 men with lovers at their sides proved a truth no strategist could ignore. Cohesion beats pedigree. When victory turns you into a tool. Victory is rarely kind to elite units. After Leuctra, the Sacred Band became Thebes' answer to everything: rebellions, border clashes, rivalries. Thebes leaned on them like a man leans on his strongest leg until the leg breaks. They marched constantly, fought constantly, slept in strange places, ate cold meals, buried friends. They also aged. Replacement was slow. You cannot mass-produce attachment. You cannot force devotion to bloom on a schedule. So the unit became more veteran, more severe, more intimate in its silence. Pairs learned to love while expecting loss. That changes the shape of a relationship. It makes tenderness more urgent and anger more dangerous. They developed rituals for grief that were almost clinical, short, controlled, private. They did not allow mourning to fracture readiness, because in their world, grief was not an emotion, it was a battlefield risk. The final test. In 338 BCE, at Chaeronea, Thebes faced Macedon, Philip II and his son Alexander. Macedon fought differently. Their phalanx used longer spears, different spacing, different tempo. Their combined arms, cavalry, infantry, tactical feints, made traditional hoplite battles feel slow and old. The Sacred Band was still deadly, but now they faced a system that could outmaneuver them. The battle unfolded like a trap closing. The Sacred Band held their ground as they always had. They advanced when ordered. They absorbed pressure. Then the Macedonian line shifted, feinted, pulled back. Some Theban forces followed too far. A gap opened. Alexander's cavalry struck like a knife. The Sacred Band found themselves pressed from angles of phalanx hates, front and side. Spears snapped. Men were forced into close sword work under cavalry pressure. The crush became chaos. And this is where their psychology became both strength and doom. A normal unit might attempt escape when surrounded. The Sacred Band did not have that option. To retreat meant leaving your partner behind. To break meant turning your back while he died. So they did the only thing they had been built to do. They stood. They fought in knots of pairs, shields broken, helmets dented, breathing loud and ragged. They killed until their arms failed. They were hacked down in place. When the field quieted, their bodies were found close together, as if even death could not separate them. Philip II is said to have wept at the sight, not because he was sentimental, because he recognized something rare. Men who choose death when survival is available are not merely brave, they are engineered. The Sacred Band was destroyed at Chaeronea, but their legacy didn't die. It became a lesson whispered through history. The strongest army is not always the most disciplined, not always the best armed, not always the largest. Sometimes the strongest army is the one that best understands the human heart. Thebes understood it. They took love, an unpredictable, messy force, and hammered it into a weapon. It worked. And it cost them everything. Because when you build soldiers who cannot run, you also build soldiers who cannot survive. That's the sacred truth of the Sacred Band. They did not win by being fearless. They won because they were unable to choose anything except each other. And on the day the world finally overcame them, they kept that oath. Not because it was noble, because by then it was the only way they knew how to breathe.